there's a beautiful story comes out of the ancient Vedic tradition, the Hindu tradition, and it said that in the womb, the baby is just like floating in the bliss of, the eternal ocean, the mother, right? And it said that in the baby's consciousness, it's hearing this mantra, and it's Shivoham, Shivoham. I am the auspicious one. I am the infinite. I am the divine, right? And that's its awareness. Then it goes through that, terribly horrible, traumatic birth experience, and the baby comes out, and now it's going, go home, go home, go home, go home. It's like crying like that, go home, go home. Go home means, who am I? The trauma of the birth caused the forgetting. And the baby's coming out going, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And it looks to mom and dad, and, they start right away. Well, you're my son. You're going to grow up to be this. You're my daughter. You're going to be that. You're a girl. You can only do this. Layer upon layer upon layer of conditioning gets laid upon that divine little consciousness.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman, and my guest today is Lawrence Edwards, PhD, and we are going to be talking about consciousness, Kundalini, compassion, and transformation. But before we do that, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can listen to all of my episodes, read synopses on the episodes, a little bio on myself, and there is a donate button if you'd like to support the show. That will also give you access to some extra content. There's also a YouTube channel that you can listen to the episodes. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman, and The Exploding Human Facebook page. My guest today is Lawrence Edwards. I had a great talk with him. He is a recognized expert in the field of Kundalini, our innate power of consciousness that creates the highest order of transformation and revelation. This power is the foundation of all yogic, mantra, and meditative practices. Lawrence is regarded by many as a modern-day mystic, known for his love of the divine. And we are going to be talking about all those things and having a great time doing it. So listen in. This is Dr. Lawrence Edwards. Good morning, Lawrence. It's morning for me. You're in the East Coast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm here in California, as you can see by my virtual palm tree background.
Yeah. Very good.
We were just talking before I hit the record button, and I should have done it before. But we were just talking about Lawrence's work in addiction and dual diagnosis, and we were talking about Carl Jung. So tell me about that part of your history of working with addiction.
Well, what I was, when we were just talking, it was, that perspective on that Jung brought to, the founder of the AA program, Bill, and Jung added the whole dimension of reliance on a higher power, on, in the Jungian framework. That transcendent function is the archetype of the self, is an archetype of the divine, of God. And that this power of the infinite to help inform us, uplift us, give us strength to take on challenges in life that the poor afflicted ego mind, and whatever its history was, whatever the traumas it went through in its family, in our culture, there's this much bigger power of grace, a power of the divine. And so Jung helped inform that that's something that in dealing with big challenges like addiction, to turn to that and develop a connection is deeply related to the work that I do that brought me into from Jungian studies into the studies of meditation and Tibetan Buddhist practices and yogic practices. And of the yogic tradition, the most esoteric is Kundalini. And so that's why I've been asked in various venues to write about, to help people to understand this profoundly mystical branch of the Eastern traditions.
Let's start with that then, because I hear the word Kundalini and I think of Kundalini yoga and this really sort of difficult power yoga that only athletic people can do. And then there's this idea, and I could be so off because it's just piecemealed stuff. And I've done yoga, but not that,
Right.
that there's some coiled energy at the base of the spine that gets released, and it's almost too much to handle for most people. This is my idea of when I hear Kundalini.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're not alone in that, as I'm sure. All you have to do is Google it, and you come up with all kinds of um, misinformed, partially informed, distorted. So, I've spent, most of my life in the study and practice. I trained as a monk in India under a great classic Kundalini yoga master, and there's a couple of things that differentiate. One is the what was brought to the West and sort of named Kundalini wasn't the ancient classic form of Kundalini, and so it's a different kind of practice. There are great benefits to it, but it's very forceful. There's a lot of forceful pranayamas and energy kinds of practices involved in it. I tried it back in the early 70s with the teacher who brought it over. It was not something that I found valuable. Certainly wasn't what Jung was writing about in the 1930s about Kundalini, because he had some profound insights into Kundalini that he wrote about. But just to sort of simplify it, and Kundalini is just a Sanskrit term. It means coiled one, and it just refers to this potential. Like you might think of the potential energy in a spring that's coiled and holding energy. And when you release it, it expands, right? So that's the image. It's an archetypal image. And in the system of these kinds of symbolic images that refer to chakras and all these esoteric kinds of things that can be very confusing to the ordinary mind, we have to remember these are symbols. They're not talking concrete things. And so it's really the symbol of what this potential energy of consciousness is that's present in everyone. Well, when you start looking, as my background and training both in psychology and Jung and comparative studies and Joseph Campbell, you start to see that the same terminology is used for the presence of the Holy Spirit within everyone. Holy Spirit in the Christian tradition is Kundalini in the yogic tradition, or Qi in the Tai Chi and even Taoist kinds of traditions, or bodhicitta, this power of consciousness of Buddha mind. So we have to be able to translate between the different traditions to understand, so that we don't get locked into some concrete image that was only a symbol to begin with, trying to point beyond itself. But Kundalini is this power of extraordinary consciousness and transformation. It's also known as the power of grace. It's another term for it. It's said to be the face of the divine, meaning that just by the way that we see somebody's face, I see your face and I know, oh, there's Bob. By somebody's face, we recognize who they are. By the power of Kundalini, we recognize the divine within us and the divine within all. So it's a power of consciousness to know the divine as our own self, as the self of all, in addition to knowing who we are as a ordinary person.
Yeah, you were talking about in this interview I saw you on that I was telling you about before, which I found really fascinating, because it's a thing that is very frustrating to me in some ways, that we have this seeking of what you're talking about, and and at moments, many moments, finding it and feeling it and being a part of it. And then there's that concrete day to day living thing that we have to have also in order to move around with our bodies and function and pay our bills. And those two things seem to fight each other sometimes. And yeah, the integration of those things, like, can I walk around? This is the question. Can I walk around doing my daily stuff and still feel the other thing? Or do I have to just stop and meditate? And I want to, that's what I think most people want. They want to feel that being in the moment, in presence, and still be able to function.
Yeah, exactly. And that is historically the purpose of, I mean, the Kundalini references to that power, that innate power that once awakened really begins to unfold. Is the end point is we live that moment by moment. We live knowing the fullness of our own being. And in this way, Buddha and Buddhist practice and yogic practice, there's some overlap about, Buddha talked about when you become enlightened, when you reach nirvana in the Buddhist tradition, you become immersed in what are called the four immeasurables, because the root quality of who we are, the essential nature of our being as consciousness, has these irreducible qualities. And what he talked about was boundless love, boundless compassion, right? Boundless wisdom, and unshakable, boundless equanimity. That this state is suffused with that. The mind, being an instrument for knowing discrete, separate things, even has to divide that up into four things. They're not. In the same way that, fire is not heat and light, and you have to add them together to get fire. No, fire is heat and light. These four things are suffused in that as the root of who we are. And to know that and then walk into the world, now we can walk compassion, love, kindness, steadiness. Doesn't the world need that? It needs the fullness of our humanity, because that's what we're capable of.
I like to think, just sort of fantastically, that in the past we were more there as a species, and that modernization and technology and money and materialism has pulled us away as human beings. Now, I don't know if we were any more evolved in these ways. It seems like the evolving in the way I'm talking about, I'll just use the word materialism, actually detracts or can detract from the spiritual quest.
Well, it's a way that captures our sense of identity. The ordinary mind and our ego identity, which we just take for granted, my sense of me, my sense of I-ness. And that is conditioned to be identified with concrete things, my physical body and its form, the roles I play in relationship to others. If you ask somebody, who are you? They'll talk about, the job that they have, they're married, they're not married, they have kids. It's attributes of things, or attributes of being in relationship to something. So that's where our consciousness starts for the ordinary mind. And so we do have to kind of pry it loose from being solely identified with these material things to begin to experience the fullness of, what's consciousness free of that container? A container is what we identify with. When we say, I am a man, it's like we're taking consciousness, this awareness of I am is just being, then we're putting into the container of man, whatever that means for me. It might mean something different for me than it does for you. Mm-hmm. But it's like a container. And consciousness is fluid. When you pour consciousness into a container, it takes the shape of the container, right? That container was man. Another is a woman. Another is no gender. Another is I'm a boss, I'm a worker, I'm a this, or I'm that. Every time we say I am, we're putting I am awareness into a container. But all the way back into, even the origins of the Old Testament, when Moses tries to say to God, who are you anyway? And he says, I am that I am. It's in the Bible. I am pure, what's known as pure I am awareness, uncontained. That same thing is in the Eastern traditions. The root mantra of being is called Hamsa. It simply means I am that, meaning all that is. So we can come back to that awareness that never really was disrupted, but we got so identified with the mind and body, we lost sight of what's already present in here. And that's what Kundalini, the practices, Holy Spirit, I mean, it's the root of all spiritual traditions. The depths of them are is that there's this power of transcendence that reveals the truth of who we are and the living presence of the divine in each moment.
Seems like babies know that right when they come out, and I look at a baby, they're
Yeah,
so just there and in the present moment,
yeah,
and mostly, unless they're hungry, they're laughing, they're smiling,
yeah, yeah.
they're gurgling. Those are all pleasure.
There's a beautiful story comes out of the ancient Vedic tradition, the Hindu tradition, and it said that in the womb, the baby is just like floating in the bliss of the eternal ocean, the mother, right? And it said that in the baby's consciousness, it's hearing this mantra, and it's Shivoham, Shivoham. I am the auspicious one. I am the infinite. I am the divine, right? And that's its awareness. Then it goes through that, terribly horrible, traumatic birth experience, and the baby comes out, and now it's going, go home, go home, go home, go home. It's like crying like that. Go home, go home. Go home means who am I? The trauma of the birth caused the forgetting. And the baby's coming out going, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And it looks to mom and dad, and they start right away. Well, you're my son. You're going to grow up to be this. You're my daughter. You're going to be that.
Yeah.
You're a girl. You can only do this. And layer upon layer upon layer of conditioning gets laid upon that divine little consciousness.
I'm going to tell you a little story, which I've told on this before on this podcast, but I remember my birth, and it was not like I remember getting a parking ticket or
Right.
anything like that, but I remember that being in this vastness of some kind and this very powerful energy transporting me from one place to another,
Mhm.
scaring me. And then this was an inner laugh and the words, "Oh, yeah, this again."
Right. Right.
and and I never forgot that. And I
Yeah.
just all through my childhood, and still, I don't know, I'm 67 years old. I remember it. I remember the
Yeah.
feeling of this sort of like this was going to be great and
Right.
funny and amusing and difficult, and it was going to be all those things, but I liked it.
Right. Yeah.
Now, whether that's, it's not obviously provable in the classic sense, but I know it.
You
That's
know it. And
yeah.
that's part of what, the meditative traditions affirm is that we have these deep capacity for knowing. That's beyond sort of the materialist, scientific materialism where you have to have, some kind of consensual exterior validation. Well, you can have consensual interior. You can, and I write about even that kind of experience in my book, The Soul's Journey: Guidance from the Divine Within. Just that kind of experience of being born and dissolving and coming back, and the different patterns that takes. So you might be interested in the Soul's Journey book.
I I already am.
All right.
I'm there. And I'm curious to see what happens on the next round when I come back again, because I'm not done. I don't feel like I've gotten to the
Right.
place where I did, and I saw that you had studied hypnotherapy, so I did many years ago. I like to experiment with
Yeah.
myself over the years with different things. So I went and did some hypnotherapy, and I've done 3 past life regressions. And one of the things that came out of it, or rather, some of the specifics, which showed me why I'm afraid of certain things
Hmm.
now, and it was very informative. But this idea that death is not a big deal, from going from one life to the next, seemed so inconsequential not unimportant, but not this big deal that we make it. And that was really probably the best thing that came out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. As the meditative process unfolds, people can have those kinds of experiences. The basically you rely on the power of consciousness to bring it up rather than having meditation focused on trying to know past lives, because that's an endless domain that one can explore and never get any freer having done it. So if the meditative practices are aimed at getting us free, it's free of our entire past, all the conditioning, all the lifetimes, all the karmas, all everything. And sometimes spontaneously, Shakti Kundalini will bring up past life experiences. I mean, I've had numerous ones like that. But only when it's going to be fruitful in this life to further our sadhana, our spiritual practice, and getting free.
Yeah. Yeah. So have you done past life regressions on patients or on yourself? Had somebody guide you?
I've done it with clients,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had it happen spontaneously in meditative practices.
You want to give me one? I want to hear one. I'll trade with you. I love that. I love specifics. When I used to read, case studies like Freud and stuff, when the Q came to me and he said this, and I'm like, yeah. Let me hear the specifics. You don't have to if you don't want to.
Well, I mean, there's just they're meaningful in the context of my interior life. I don't know how meaningful they are in for somebody else, but
Yeah.
I'll share. I mean, I've had a number of lifetimes come up, which would be predictable, of having been a Tibetan Buddhist monk and living in remote monasteries in the Himalayas and doing practices for lifetimes. And they were exquisite lifetimes of deep, deep practice, and the experience of studying under the tutelage of extraordinary masters, whose selflessness and compassion, unfathomable. And to have lived in that context and to see the power of that loving compassion, just simply, not with fame, not with fortune, not with big names, no television, just in, a little monastery on a rock up in the Himalayas. That's the flowering of the highest capacity of humans to live this love, to live this compassion, to live this selflessness into the world and see it transform people. And the experiences of people who would come and wander into the monastery and how they were embraced and loved and given to and cared for. And they might just be there for an hour, they might be there for a day, they might be there for a lifetime. But all were met as the pure embodiment of the highest and treated that way.
So this has been a quest of yours, your entire lives, plural. It seems like you kind of went, I'm going to keep doing this over and over again. You're doing it now.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, I had a couple. Well, one was I was in a war. I wasn't a soldier, but I was in a war in like ancient, I don't know, let's just say Mesopotamia. And everyone was fighting. They were on horses and they had spears and it was violent. And I remember like going out into like the town square and saying, no, this isn't the way to do it. Stop. And no one was paying attention. And I've always been absolutely terrified of violence. I was like, now I get it, because I don't know if it was abnormally terrified of it. It just really bothers me when I see it. Or if I am angry enough to maybe even want to do it, it scares me a little bit. And then I had another lifetime where I was a woman in like Eastern Europe, taking care of an infirm husband and being a domestic in a wealthy person's home. And what I realized was how difficult the lives of women were.
Mm.
And those were two experiences that I had in past life stuff. So I learned things, but it wasn't any kind of big spiritual awakening, but it was really interesting, and I would
Yeah.
I would do it again just because it's like so adventurous.
Right. Right. Yeah, and if it helps inform, like, oh, that's part of that, the power behind why I'm so fascinated by or why I'm averse to something, then that can help and just say, yeah, and I'm staying, I learned that lesson. I don't have to keep repeating it.
Yeah, yeah. So when we're talking about these wonderful things, and then we have the other side of it, which is what I was just talking about: violence, cruelty, um, mass stupidity, lots of things that are so unpleasant, which can be the argument that there is no uh, God or whatever
Right.
word you want to use. What do you think it is, and what do the people that you've studied say about that dichotomy in the way that man is living on
Right.
this planet? It's so opposite and so disturbing sometimes, where you just go, hey, there's this knowledge that's here. It can
Right.
be tapped into. Come on, guys, let's
Yeah. Oh
everyone.
yeah. No,
Yeah,
it's hideous. It's hideous.
yeah, and
It's
it really freaks me out sometimes. I'm like, is
yeah.
this just a big failed experiment where only
Right.
this tiny percentage of people have a successful outcome?
Well, two things. One is, I suggest people, and it's a book I love to recommend, and it's called Love Poems from God. Love Poems from God. And it was translated by a fellow named Daniel Ladinsky. And it's the poetry of many great poet mystic saints from all traditions. And the unifying vision behind that comes out, whether it's from St. John of the Cross or St. Teresa of Avila or Hafiz or Rumi or Kabir, any number of poet saints, um, talking about that, exactly what you're talking about. Here's this directly experienceable reality of the unity of God holding everything, and yet look at the imperfection in it. And how do you come to reconcile that? And the on one level, the answer is it's beyond the mind. The state of unity consciousness where we see this, all of this, nothing left out, as the unfolding of the divine, that's entering into a mystical state. That's samadhi. One can know that directly, but not with the ordinary mind. The ordinary mind is a dichotomous instrument. It does compare and contrast, separate this and that. And so it's bound to that domain where there are pairs of opposites, good and bad, right?
Mhm.
And the transcendence of that takes you out of the mind. But knowing that can now inform the mind. And when you see, and especially in the Eastern traditions, though there's overlap with Western mystical traditions as well, where and now coming back to Kundalini and the Kundalini yoga tradition, it's really seen as what we see going on is what happens when you're ignorant of the truth of who you are. When you know the fullness of your divine nature, when you can see that divinity in every being, you're going to act spontaneously with love, with compassion, because all there is yourself. All there is the divine. It's the ignorance of that, it's the loss of knowing that then creates this tiny, what's called an afflicted identity, the little ego mind. The little ego mind lives in a state of such want and need, such lack and deficiency. And then out of those states of lack and deficiency, it flails about. I got to have this. I got to consume that. I have to have this status. I got to build myself up. All the suffering that we create for ourselves and others is born out of that state of ignorance and the lack and the want and the deficiency that's part of that. So that's why the Eastern traditions especially say, if we want to change something, you have to cut through that root ignorance. You have to cut through the root unknowing of your divine nature. If you're not resting in the truth of who you are, and you're caught in that little contracted self, you're going to keep flailing about. Coming home through meditative practices to that frees it. So it's not then I'm just trying to repress that and be a good person. I'm going to be a good character. I'm going to be aligned with these high teachings. But oh boy, I got these impulses roiling inside,
Yeah.
because those impulses are coming out of that ignorance. So that added to the sense of the arc of evolution for a soul's journey is across lifetimes that we evolve to get to the point of truly knowing that, puts this world that we live in the yogic tradition, it's called karma bhumi. Bhumi means world. Karma is the law of cause and effect. So this is a world to incarnate into, to take form in, to learn that, oh, when we do something, there's an impact. And it may not be immediate. We might have to come back in another lifetime to experience that. But we're going to learn over the course of these many lifetimes and this evolution of the soul across lifetimes, the tremendous impact of that cause and effect. And still we start to see the greatest effects, the most positive effects come out of being loving, kind, compassionate, generous, having equanimity, non-reactivity. And we start to see them. We start to see that, oh, that's actually our root nature. And this false self of that little contracted ego mind, that's not who I am. And I can use that now. I can recreate it as an instrument to serve my highest nature rather than serving ignorance. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It completely makes sense to me. It's as you were talking, I'm thinking when you talked about people being afflicted, spiritually afflicted, I guess is really what it is. The people that are the most afflicted in my opinion, seek the most power over others, the gathering of things, and and all that, and it's a sickness, but they get those people because they're so driven. This is a little dark, but they're so driven that they attain these positions where it affects masses of people, and they're actually the sickest people in many ways. And that is frustrating.
Yeah.
Just like,
no, it's
got it backwards, man.
Right. But so seeing that is seeing that, yes, people can be so driven, and especially when they're like hoarding it. You can accumulate great karmas and become a king, like King Janaka in the Hindu tradition. But he was an enlightened king. So he wasn't into power as an ego thing. He was, a generous, enlightened being and uplifted everyone. It's the people who have that deficiency that so lack and still want to accumulate more. And then the perspective that drives them is one of domination and exploitation, because they're trying to make up for a black hole of emptiness
Yeah.
that will never be filled. They can consume the earth until it's nothing but a charred cinder and still be empty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Too much is not enough.
No, I was working with a person one time that came to me, and we were talking about this fullness of being, and a person very driven, very wealthy. And I said, well, how much is enough? And she said, I don't think, I don't, I, it like literally stopped her like that. There was no, she says, I keep over, several millions of dollars in my checking account just to feel safe.
Oh,
Now that's tragic.
it
So
really
that
is.
that helps us to see that people driven like this are in a tragic state. No matter how much our materialist culture wants to, um, you know, aggrandize the wealthy, what would drive somebody to hold that much wealth while seeing so much suffering in the world? To me, that's a state of such poverty. I have to feel compassion for them.
Yeah, it's when you told me that, I just was like, "Oh man, that's really sad."
Yeah,
I actually felt for her, and
yeah,
she needs to write me a check.
right.
There was something you were talking about in the interview I saw you on, where you were working in I think it was a psychiatric facility,
Mhm,
um, with people that were having crises in terms of their spiritual life,
mhm,
that were in and talking about it, openly talking about it. You mentioned that.
mhm.
And I was wondering, are there people, there must be people that are much stronger in that part and not very good or able in the pragmatic day-to-day living part. So they don't function well in regular society with, holding a job and paying bills and
Right.
in relationships, but they're sort of, I guess, tripping out. Are any of those people, are they tortured by that, or are they okay with it? They just can't function. I'm sort of interested in this
Mm,
idea of, um, because we see the balance going one way off the on the materialistic side, but
right.
when it's the other way, those people get put away into institutions. And how do you work with those people to bring them to a place where they can do both?
Right. Well, just to sort of further differentiate that a bit, because there are people who are experiencing, mental illness and need, the kinds
Yeah,
of professional skills and everything from, what's going to be helpful in terms of therapies to do that. And that's not necessarily related to Kundalini.
right.
It comes up sometimes around Kundalini because people will go, "Oh, it's I'm losing it because of Kundalini." And it's gotten a kind of an aura around it like that. And I have to say that 99.9% of the people I have worked with, over thousands of people, Kundalini awakening is the experience of an expansion of being carried by grace, and sometimes challenging to one's belief system and sense of self, but not disintegrative. But for some people, it does feel acutely disintegrative. And unfortunately, we often don't have a sort of a paradigm to help contain that, to hold that. When I was helping to run a private Jungian psychiatric treatment center back in the 70s and 80s, fortunately, that was a place that we had a couple of individuals who had some kind of awakening experience. They had actually been in India and came back to the States and had a psychotic break.
Mm,
But it was also connected to some deep spiritual experiences. And the ego mind is the aspect of our consciousness that has to sort of work that boundary between the transcendent and just everyday material reality. And transcendent experiences can be overwhelming to the ego mind. And then it has to get back down to, okay, what do I have to do? I get up in the morning, I make my bed, I brush my teeth, I do what has to be done as I even carry that. Now you can see to some degree the disciplines in a monastery, because I've lived in ashrams, which are like a monastic kind of communities in India, where the discipline is quite strong in terms of how you have to live the day-to-day schedule, in part because that engages the ego mind in keeping that strength, so that then when you're going into meditation, that strong ego mind is present to come back to. So when you look at the disciplines and practices, even in various forms of yoga, they're very demanding on a certain level, because meditation in the deeper levels, when we start to go into states of samadhi, I'm not talking about, there are many great uses of meditation for stress management and mindfulness, and I've done, endless trainings on that. Now I'm talking in the deep mystical end.
Okay.
Um, that in those deeper spaces, it's in a sense, meditation is like park the body and leave it. Your consciousness expands way beyond ordinary reality. But when you come back, you need to know, you turn the key. It's like you go out to the garage in the morning, you turn the car key on, you expect it to start up and go out and run your errands. Well, the yogis kind of treat the mind and body in that way, make it very strong, very focused, very skilled. Another meaning for yoga is skill in action, to be skillful, mindful. Uh, that's so that even when we're going into or being infused with sort of these transcendent states in the moment, the solidity of this vehicle of mind and body is there to carry on day-to-day functioning.
That's a great explanation. I love that.
Mm.
Yeah, I always wondered why, it was so disciplined in those places that you read about, and I've talked to a number of people that have done this kind of work, and that was probably the best explanation I've heard. Is it actually is in service of the awakening.
We don't get rid of the ego. There's a lot of misunderstanding when they say sort of, the ego death or get rid of the ego and stuff. That conjures the wrong understanding for most people. If you don't have an ego, you're going to be mentally ill. Um, on the other hand, from the Eastern traditions, if you're solely identified with the ego, you're spiritually ill. You're afflicted. So it's the ego should be a strong instrument in service of your infinite self.
I like that because the idea of getting rid of something always seemed uh, untrue
Yeah.
and impossible.
Yeah. No, it's good intuition on your part.
Yeah. I was like, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about, I don't know why I've been thinking about this a lot, because I've been reading about, I've been doing a lot of stuff on sound,
Mm-hmm.
and I think sound's really important.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, sound has to travel through something. It can't travel through nothing, because that just by definition. So the space between you and I, or me and the tree outside my window, is not nothing. It's something.
Right.
And there's more of that than there seems like anything else that looks solid. It appears to be solid and is solid, in the conventional sense.
Right.
So that to me, and when you look out in space and you see all that supposed nothing, it's not nothing. I guess one of the words I've heard used is plasma. It's another state of energy of solid, liquid, gas. And then there's something else. And I think that is fascinating to me, that when I was trying to understand things like, and it's pretty out there stuff, remote viewing or remote healing, being able to, it seems like if you are able to evolve spiritually in a way, that thing that's sort of what appears to be nothing, that's not nothing, is something that you can be a part of in a new way.
Right.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, well, yeah. And in fact, the yogis really mapped out that territory long ago. And it was interesting. One of my teachers, physicists from Stanford University came to visit him to talk about, the high energy. They were working on high energy physics and particle accelerators and all these things. And the ancient tradition of Kashmir Shaivism that I studied under this master with is all about that power and energy and vibration being the root of everything. And describes these different states of the vibration of consciousness going from the infinite and coalescing into the finite, what looks like concrete matter.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, Einstein showed there's no such thing as concrete anything. It's all energy. It's only bound energy. There's nothing. You can't find a solid particle. The deeper, fuller, smaller they get, nothing there. Nothing but energy. And down into string theory and energy. there's vibration. And sound is a vibratory form of the conveyance of energy as well. So sound is used very explicitly for even giving that awakening of Kundalini through mantra. That's why, in the many videos that we have on the Anamkara YouTube channel for Anamkara Meditation Foundation, is the nonprofit that I created 20 years ago to make all this freely available online.
Mm-hmm.
And so sound and sacred sound induces shifts in consciousness, because the power of mantra is the throb of the consciousness encoded in that mantra. And it has nothing to do with the word form or the word meaning. It's the power of consciousness inherent to that vibration that can shift our consciousness. And there are limited ways that that operates. Even in music has that power to shift our consciousness. Sacred music shifts our consciousness. Mantra is a very specific and whole science to how to do that, to awaken our transcendent consciousness.
Yeah, I've been getting more and more into this idea of vibration, and sound is right probably the best way for me to access it. And sometimes it's pretty amazing, you just,
Oh, yeah.
And when I listen to certain music can take me places, and other
Yeah.
music can really irritate me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, what's wrong here? This is like, I'm
Right.
uncomfortable. This is just feels weird. And
Yeah.
or I go, oh, that's just beautiful. It's bringing me to tears.
Right. Well, and the same thing comes up, part of my work is in neurosciences, because I'm board certified as a neurotherapist and neurobiofeedback. Also has to do with using sound. There's a thing called binaural beats that has to do with brainwave entrainment. And so certain sounds will entrain the brain to certain frequencies. Also, pulsed light will do that. So there are light and sound machines that can help shift your state. Or we can train the brain with neurofeedback sensors to shift the frequency of how fast different neurons are firing. And as you change that, you change your state. So there are neurofeedback programs that I've worked with people doing meditatively, that if you shift, ordinary everyday waking state is in this beta frequency. It's like 15 to 18 cycles per second. You start to go into meditation, you start to go into alpha. Well, that's 12 to 15 cycles per second. You start to go deeper into meditation, you start to get into theta. That's 4 to 8 cycles per second. So you're seeing the brain is slowing down and consciousness is expanding.
We need to do this in schools,
Yeah,
regular old public school.
I know.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Just to
I had a
offer that.
colleague, a wonderful woman who got a neurofeedback training program into a school here in New York in Yonkers. So this was years ago, because it's so good for training for ADHD and relieving people of ADHD without the medications,
Mm-hmm.
because you can do that in many cases, And it was very successful. They ran out of money and they wouldn't renew it.
Of course. Yeah. And I
Even though
think it
they
would.
showed that the program, because the kids who went through it were then mainstreamed and didn't need all the ancillary services, they actually saved more money on extra services than they spent on a few laptops or computers and stuff, and they couldn't get the budget passed.
Somebody just didn't get it.
Didn't get it.
Didn't get it. It's too weird. We're not doing it.
Yeah.
It must help with depression too, some of that biofeedback, I would think.
Yeah, neurofeedback more than the biofeedback. Biofeedback is kind of a general term. Neurofeedback is working with the brain, EEG. So EEG biofeedback or neurofeedback, yes, can help with many different forms of depression.
It seems like depression has I'll just talk about it for a second, because it seems like there's more of it. Maybe I'm just more aware of it, but it
Hmm.
seems like it's diagnosed, whatever that means, more frequently. And people say, I'm depressed, and there's a lot of people I know on lots of different medications. And it seems like partly a function of the way the society's gone. Like we've gone to this very fast paced, chaotic kind of distraction oriented society, which I think makes me depressed just thinking about
Right.
it. Have you noticed that in your practice that there's more of people coming
I,
saying, I'm just depressed, I don't know why?
I don't know so much. Well, yeah, in numbers perhaps more, but I mean, it's also been it's more acceptable to talk about it, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it is good.
Because I remember doing, working in some other countries where mental illness is still so highly stigmatized. I mean, even if a person was, desperately mentally ill with schizophrenia, they could hardly get mental health help. Um, so it gets more talked about, but I think it's important what you say about the connection between a culture that alienates people from their real self,
Mhm.
and then they live in this disconnected way, trying to find meaning in material consumption that will never be fulfilling. That we don't promote that, the most important things have to do with these deeper values and meaning of a human life, and being connected and being able to be loving, compassionate, kind, and not confuse that with, oh, I'm a member of this religion and I'm a fundamentalist on that, or I'm a this or that. No, no, that's getting lost in the same, nasty soup. No, what's our deep nature of being compassionate, kind, loving, connected people, connected to the depths of who we are, out of which creativity springs, out of which joy springs. That's why one of the four immeasurables is joy, rapture. You read and go into these states yourself. They're rapturous. They're filled with this loving, ecstatic, living presence. If we know that's the truth of who we are, then we're not going to accept being forced into these cages, even if they're dressed up with, gold mansions.
Sometimes, over the years, I've met certain people that seem to come into the world and they're like that way. They just
Mhm.
seem so, and I'm like, I look at them and I'm like, how did you came in like this? I mean, they just seem naturally
Yeah,
kind, and nothing's, the edges are, not sharp, and you just,
right.
and they just vibrate in a way that's so disarming and beautiful. And I'm like, and I remember staring at people like that,
Yeah.
just trying to figure out, like, because I was just, fairly, agitated most of the time as a young person. And I'm like, am I not, are they not seeing clearly? Or am
Right.
I the one who's not seeing clearly?
Right. Yeah.
But they, they felt better to be around than me being by myself. So I
Yeah.
thought, well, maybe it's, uh, be almost envious of them. When you look at people that are disabled, but they're like children,
Yeah.
but they're adults, and they're, my wife worked in a place. She said they were on, they were adults, but they were on these giant tricycles riding around, and just the happiest people. She goes, I used to leave there feeling so good
Right.
because it was, and there's something like, you look at those people and you go, man, they got it made. They don't, but but just in that way, to
Right.
not have progressed mentally enough to be agitated.
Ah. Well,
I,
when one has one's full faculties and is that's lifetimes of practice. I
yeah,
mean, we often see people, they just look, and if we only have a one lifetime view, then it's very mysterious. If you understand that no, the soul's journey goes across lifetimes of evolution, then we have a much deeper appreciation that when people carry that wonderful state, the lifetimes that went into cultivating that and being dedicated to be in that state and to walk. This is our highest calling. It's said that humanity, the two highest callings for humanity, are to know the infinite as ourself and the self of all, and to serve that moment by moment. This is the highest purpose of a human birth, to know the infinite as all and to serve it moment by moment.
which is
Takes lifetimes and lifetimes to come to that, to know that, to be immersed in that, and then to have created a vehicle that will serve to do that.
So you're talking about compassion, really, is
Yeah.
what that is.
Yeah.
Which, everything I've read says that that's the ultimate way to live. And sometimes I have to pretend, and sometimes it's real.
Yeah.
But I
Oh,
do
yeah.
it anyway.
Absolutely. No.
Yeah. The idea of being
It's always real, but for
yeah.
the poor ego mind trying to manifest it, it's going, oh, I'm going to have to fake this one.
Yeah. I just picture a guy standing with his arms up, shouting to the world, "I'm the most compassionate person there is. I win." Oh, thank you so much for talking to me. Boy, you're a fun guy to talk to, and you've done so much great stuff. Let's plug some of your so people can come. I went to your website, and I know you have a couple of websites and your
Yeah.
nonprofit. So let's tell our
Well, the
listeners.
two most important, the Anam Cara. Anam Cara is an ancient Gaelic term. It means friend of the soul. So anamcarameditation.org.
And
And
do
then
you
there
want
are
to spell
all,
that? Because it's
yeah, N is in Nancy, M is in Mary, CARA, and then meditation. So Anamkara, meditation.org. And then there's free videos. We offer a free weekly Zoom meditation program every Thursday night at 7:15 New York time.
Oh, okay.
And then we put up the videos the next week for that. So lots of free resources to support people in deepening and expanding their meditative practices in a non-denominational way. I mean, a draw from many different traditions. And then the website around some of my writings and things that I offer, it's called thesoulsjourney.com. No apostrophe in the souls, just in the web name. It's just thesoulsjourney.com. And that has access then to, books that I've published through Sounds True and other kinds of this videos, podcasts, things like that, resources, all freely available to people.
Great. I was at that Soul's Journey websites, and it's great.
Yeah.
Listeners, whoever's listening, go to there and check it out.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. I really appreciate it, and have a beautiful day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We're all singing in the same choir. That's how I look at
Aren't we? I have a friend, he said, have a beautiful day, unless, of course, you have other plans.
it.
Much appreciation for y'all listening into The Exploding Human. Please check out the website, theexplodinghuman.com, the YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. And big thanks to Dr. Lawrence Edwards for talking to me today. Had a great time talking to him. Have a blessed day, everybody. Bye.